They say that the walls of a house remember everything. I used to believe that the memories held within my little yellow house were only good ones, laughter ringing down the hallway, the smell of Sunday roasts lingering long after the dishes were done, the sound of my boy's tiny feet racing across the wooden floor, chasing dreams bigger than this old roof could hold. This house was my fortress, my pride. It stood tall even after my husband passed away too young, too soon. It was the place where I raised my son, Matthew, with all the love I could gather in my worn-out hands. Every creaky floorboard, every chipped window pane held a piece of our story. We didn't have much, but we had each other. That was enough. I still remember the day Matthew introduced me to Clara. She was all sunshine, smiles, and a laugh that could light up the darkest corners. I welcomed her into our lives with open arms, maybe too eagerly. I thought to myself, at last, he won't be alone. At last, I won't be alone. The wedding was a modest affair in the backyard, beneath the old oak tree that Matthew used to climb when he was a boy. I baked pies. Clara wore a simple white dress, and Matthew looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he ever whispered. I cried that day, tears of joy, I told everyone, but there was a pinch of loneliness in there too, a whisper reminding me that life was moving on, with or without me. After they got married, they moved in with me. It made sense, the house was too big for just me, and they were saving up to buy their own place. Besides, I liked having them around. The dinners, the movie nights, the way Clara would call out, "Mom, want some coffee?" like she'd been part of the family forever. It filled the empty spaces left by years of solitude. In those early months, it felt almost magical, like a second youth had been gifted to me. We planted a garden together. We repainted the kitchen. We argued over silly things like what color the living room walls should be. I wanted a soft blue, Clara insisted on a bold mustard yellow. I let her win. "It's just paint," I said with a laugh, watching her beam with satisfaction. I didn't mind the sacrifices, the little compromises that come with living under one roof. I didn't mind giving up the master bedroom so they could have more space. I didn't mind adjusting my grocery lists to accommodate Clara's gluten-free diet, or rearranging the pantry to fit all their protein shakes and supplements. I told myself, this is what family does. This is love. Sometimes late at night, when the house grew quiet and I could hear their muffled laughter behind closed doors, I'd smile into the darkness, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the heavy quilts tucked around me. I was happy. I was needed. I was still part of something. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back now, I wonder if the walls were already whispering, if the foundation of our little world was already beginning to crack. But love has a way of blinding you, doesn't it? You don't notice the first signs, the way Clara's mom started to sound more like an obligation than a fond greeting, the way Matthew would forget to tell me about their weekend plans, leaving me sitting alone at the kitchen table with a pie cooling for no one. I brushed it off. They're newlyweds. They need their space. They love me. They're just busy. I'm lucky to have them here at all. I repeated these mantras like prayers, clinging to them as if they could ward off the cold that was starting to seep in through the walls of my own home. There was one evening I can't seem to forget. I had spent the whole afternoon preparing a big dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from our little garden, even a peach cobbler for dessert. I set the table with the good dishes, the ones I only brought out for holidays. I waited. And waited. Finally, I heard the front door open, Clara's high-pitched laugh floating in. I stepped out from the kitchen, apron still tied around my waist, my heart lifting, but they didn't even look at me. They were tangled together in each other's arms, giggling about some inside joke I wasn't part of. Matthew mumbled something about grabbing takeout after the movie. Clara wrinkled her nose at the smell of roast chicken like it was a personal offense. I stood there, holding a serving spoon, feeling like a fool. No one asked why the table was set. No one noticed the candles burning low. I told myself it was nothing. I wrapped the leftovers carefully, lined them up neatly in the fridge. I smiled when they said goodnight and closed their bedroom door. Then I sat alone in the kitchen, watching the candles sputter out one by one, plunging the room into darkness. It was just one night. Just a small thing. But in the silence that followed, the walls seemed to breathe around me, slow, heavy, mournful. Home was supposed to be safe. Home was supposed to be the one place where you didn't have to wonder if you mattered. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders, feeling the chill. Maybe, just maybe, the house was trying to warn me. Maybe it knew long before I did that the warmth I clung to was just smoke and mirrors, and that the fire had gone out a long time ago. But back then, I wasn't ready to listen. I still believed that love could fix anything. I still believed that if I just held on tighter, stayed a little quieter, loved a little harder, everything would go back to the way it was. I didn't know that sometimes, love isn't enough. I didn't know that sometimes, the people you would walk through fire for are the ones holding the matches. Not yet. But I would. Oh, I would. I told myself that love was patient. That it was my job, as a mother, as a woman who had been blessed with so much, to overlook the small hurts. To forgive the careless words. To understand the distance growing between us. After all, wasn't that what family did? But it's amazing, really, how something so small can splinter into something much larger if you ignore it long enough. Like a tiny crack running along the surface of a mirror, at first, you hardly notice. But then, one morning, the whole thing shatters under your fingertips. The first crack appeared one Sunday morning. I was in the kitchen, humming along to an old Patsy Cline record, kneading dough for biscuits. It was something I hadn't done in years, but I wanted to surprise Clara. She'd mentioned once that her grandmother used to bake fresh biscuits, and how much she missed it. When she came down the stairs, the smell must have hit her because she wrinkled her nose and said, half laughing, "Ugh, it smells like an old folks' home in here." It was a joke. I knew that. She laughed, slapped Matthew's arm playfully. He chuckled too, ruffling her hair like she was a mischievous little girl. I laughed along. What else was I supposed to do? But something tightened in my chest, a small, sharp pain that had nothing to do with age. I turned back to the counter, blinking hard against the sting in my eyes, telling myself, she didn't mean it. Don't be so sensitive. It was easier that way. It was always easier to excuse it, to smooth it over, to pretend I hadn't heard the edge in her voice. Still, I noticed I made biscuits less often after that. There were other cracks, too. Little things that, at the time, seemed too petty to mention. Clara redecorated the living room without asking, replacing my old, worn but loved furniture with sleek, cold pieces that looked like they belonged in a hotel lobby, not a home. Matthew didn't say a word about it. When I commented that I missed my old armchair, the one where I used to sit and knit, watch the sun dip below the horizon, Clara shrugged and said, it was falling apart anyway. You need to let go of some things. I smiled. I agreed. I said nothing about how that chair had cradled me through nights of grief after my husband died, how it had held me while I wept over bills I didn't know how to pay, how it had rocked Matthew to sleep when he was just a baby. Let go of some things, she said. I tried. Lord knows, I tried. I didn't want to be that kind of mother-in-law, the meddling, bitter kind you see on daytime talk shows, clinging desperately to her son like a sinking ship. I wanted to be graceful. I wanted to be loved. But it's funny how trying to make yourself smaller, quieter, more agreeable doesn't win you love. It only makes you invisible. I started to notice how often Clara would forget to tell me when she and Matthew had plans. I'd cook dinner for 3, only to eat alone because they decided, last minute, to meet friends downtown. When I asked if we could all go together sometime, Clara smiled politely and said, it's more of a young crowd, you know? young. Not like me. There was the way she took over the kitchen, rearranging cabinets so that I couldn't find a damn thing anymore. The way she laughed just a little too loudly when I struggled to keep up with new technology, rolling her eyes at Matthew as if to say, God, she's helpless. It wasn't blatant. It wasn't cruel, not outright. It was death by 1,000 small cuts. And Matthew, oh, Matthew. My sweet boy, who used to come running into my arms after a scraped knee or a broken toy, now barely looked up from his phone when I spoke. He didn't notice the way Clara corrected me at every turn, the way she sighed when I told the same old stories at dinner, the way she smiled tightly when I offered to help with anything, as if my efforts were more burden than blessing. Or maybe he did notice. Maybe that was worse. Because he noticed, and chose not to see. The day I realized something was truly wrong was a Tuesday. I was folding laundry, a chore I didn't mind you. Something about the rhythm of it had always soothed me when I overheard Clara talking on the phone in the next room. She thought I was outside, tending the garden. I don't know how much longer we can do this, she was saying. Her voice was low, sharp-edged. She's just always there. Always needing something. It's like living with a ghost. A ghost. I stood there, a towel limp in my hands, listening to my own obituary. She won't be around forever, Clara continued. A pause. A laugh. Yeah, well, maybe not as long as she thinks. The air seemed to leave my lungs all at once. I leaned against the washing machine, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it through the walls. For a long time, I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't dare confront her. I told myself, again, that I must have misheard. That I was making mountains out of molehills. That surely, they loved me. But deep down, a part of me, the part that had kept this old house standing through storm and sorrow, whispered the truth. The cracks were no longer cracks. The foundation was crumbling. And I was standing in the ruins, clutching a tattered apron, still trying to bake biscuits for people who no longer had an appetite for me. They say aging sneaks up on you. That one morning, you wake up and your hands don't quite move the way they used to. Your knees ache before your feet even hit the floor. Your reflection in the mirror becomes a stranger you're not sure you want to know. But for me, it didn't feel like a slow unraveling. It felt like betrayal. My body, once sturdy and reliable, turned against me almost overnight. At first, it was small things, a jar I couldn't twist open, a bag of groceries that felt heavier than it should have. Clara would sigh when I asked for help, tossing a mocking, "What would you do without us?" over her shoulder. I laughed it off. I always laughed it off. But inside, I could feel the quiet terror blooming. One evening, while carrying a basket of laundry up the stairs, my knee buckled without warning. I tumbled hard, bruising my ribs, my pride shattered alongside. I lay there, gasping, calling out for help. It was Clara who found me. She stood at the top of the stairs, looking down with an expression I couldn't quite read, a mixture of irritation and something colder. Without a word, she turned and walked away. It was Matthew who eventually helped me up, his face pale and panicked. He apologized over and over, but I could see it, the fear, the inconvenience flickering behind his eyes. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was a liability. The doctor said it was arthritis, worsening with stress and age. Prescribed pills. Suggested I use a cane. A cane. The very thought made me want to weep. Still, I adjusted. I always adjusted. I didn't want to be a burden. I learned to move slower. To carry lighter loads. I hid my pain behind smiles and jokes, pretending that everything was just fine. But Clara made sure I never forgot. Little things. Always little things. placing dishes on the highest shelves where she knew I couldn't reach them, leaving messes she knew I'd strain myself trying to clean, making comments, always in that sweet, syrupy voice, about how fragile I was becoming, how sad it was to see someone lose their independence. Matthew barely noticed. Or maybe he chose not to. One afternoon, Clara and I sat in the living room. Well, she sat, scrolling through her phone, while I dusted around her. I reached for the top shelf, stretching just a little too far, and the cane slipped from my hand. I stumbled, grabbing at the bookshelf to steady myself. Clara didn't move. She didn't even look up. When I finally righted myself, heart pounding, she laughed, a short, humorless sound, and said, "Maybe you should just stay downstairs from now on, Mom. Fewer chances to hurt yourself. Stay downstairs. In my own home." I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodded meekly, and retreated to the kitchen. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared up at the cracked ceiling, the same ceiling that had once witnessed Matthew's giggles, my husband's quiet snoring, the steady rhythm of a life built on love. Now it watched over a woman who had become invisible within her own walls. A few weeks later, something even more unsettling happened. I started feeling foggy. At first, I blamed the new medications. The doctor had warned about side effects, dizziness, confusion. But this felt different. There were nights I couldn't remember locking the doors, turning off the stove. Mornings when I'd wake up disoriented, unsure how I even got back to bed. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the middle of the backyard, barefoot, no memory of walking out there. Clara found me, arms crossed, smirking. "You really shouldn't be wandering around like that, Mom," she said. "What if you hurt yourself? Or, what if you forgot how to get back?" Her words buzzed in my ears, thick and sticky, impossible to brush away. That night, I checked my pill bottles. And that's when I noticed it. The tiny discrepancies. The bottles didn't feel as full as they should have. One had a different label than I remembered. The dates on my pill organizer didn't match up. A deep, sickening dread coiled in my gut. Was I losing my mind? Or was someone trying to make me think I was? The next morning, Clara insisted I start leaving my medications out on the kitchen counter, "So we can help remind you," she said sweetly. I didn't argue. I smiled. I nodded. And inside, I screamed. Because deep down, I knew. This wasn't about helping me. This was about controlling me. About breaking me down until I was no longer a mother, or a woman, or even a person, just an obstacle to be managed, removed, forgotten. I thought about the whispers I'd overheard, the casual cruelty in Clara's voice, the way Matthew had started talking about making arrangements for me, as if I weren't sitting right there at the table. I thought about the house, my house, and how, piece by piece, it was being stripped away from me. I thought about the life I had built, the love I had given so freely, and how it was being repaid with silent betrayals and poisoned kindness. I lay awake that night, staring into the darkness, clutching the cane to my chest like a lifeline. My body was betraying me. My family was betraying me. And somewhere deep inside, a new kind of strength began to stir, small, fragile, but real. The kind of strength born not from hope, but from survival. Because if no one else was going to fight for me, then damn it, I would fight for myself. After that night, everything looked different to me. The kitchen wasn't just a kitchen anymore, it was a battlefield. The walls weren't just walls, they were witnesses, silent and complicit. I moved through my own home like a ghost, afraid to touch, to speak, to exist too loudly. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How Clara would pause in conversations when I entered a room. How Matthew's smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. How they whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. Maybe they thought I was too old, too slow, too stupid to notice. Maybe once, they would have been right. But not anymore. One afternoon, I pretended to nap in the recliner while Clara and Matthew sat at the dining table, papers spread out in front of them. They spoke in hushed tones, but the house betrayed them. Old houses always do. Sound travels through it like blood through veins. We can't wait much longer, Clara hissed. I'm not spending another year wiping her drool or dealing with her tantrums. She's not that bad, Matthew muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. You saw the doctor's report, Clara snapped. Early cognitive decline. It's only going to get worse. We need her to sign the transfer before she gets declared incompetent. I froze. Transfer? What if she won't do it? Matthew asked. A pause. Clara's voice softened, oozing poison. Then we make her. I pressed my back deeper into the chair, heart thundering so loudly I was sure they could hear it. They wanted my house. They wanted me gone. Not just gone, erased. Later that evening, while they were out shopping, or at least pretending to, I went through the papers they had left behind on the dining table. Real estate forms. Power of attorney drafts. A living arrangement agreement that would have effectively stripped me of every right to my home and my decisions. And there, tucked neatly among the paperwork, was the piece de resistance. A pre-written letter requesting my admission into a care facility, citing inability to live independently and memory issues endangering her well-being. It was already signed. All that was missing was my name on the dotted line. I stood there, the room spinning, the ground buckling beneath me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. They were doing this. They had been doing this. Piece by piece, day by day, undermining my independence, questioning my sanity, isolating me, all to make it easier to strip everything away. The world tilted. The house, my house, seemed to groan around me, as if mourning what it was becoming. I pressed a hand to the wall, steadying myself. I wasn't crazy. But if I didn't act soon, they would make sure everyone thought I was. I had no plan. No allies. No one I could trust. Until I remembered Mary. Mary had lived down the street for as long as I could remember, a widow like me, sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who still did her own yard work at 72 just to prove a point. I hadn't seen her in months. Clara and Matthew had discouraged me from visiting, said it was too much exertion, too confusing for me. God, how stupid I had been. That night, after they fell asleep, I slipped out of the house, cane in one hand, heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the night sounds. Mary opened her door before I could even knock twice. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside. Over cups of too strong coffee, I poured it all out, the falls, the medication mix-ups, the whispers, the papers. When I finished, Mary didn't say a word. She just reached across the table, squeezed my hand hard, and said, "We're going to fix this." The next day, under the guise of going for a doctor's appointment, one that Clara was too busy to accompany me to, Mary drove me to a lawyer she trusted, an old friend of her late husband's. I still had power. I still had ownership. And, most importantly, I still had time. But not much. Back home, I played the role of the doddering old woman perfectly. I smiled. I nodded. I let Clara think she was winning. Inside, though, I was steeling myself. Because now, it wasn't just about the house. It wasn't just about the papers. It was about my life. My dignity. My right to exist without being treated like a stepping stone to someone else's comfort. The final straw came a few days later. I had a dizzy spell, real this time, and collapsed in the hallway. I heard Clara sigh from the living room, heard the clink of her wine glass as she set it down. Let's just leave her, she said, loud enough for me to hear. Maybe it's better this way. Matthew didn't argue. He didn't even move. I lay there, face pressed to the cold tile, a hollow kind of peace settling over me. They had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I didn't get up right away. I lay there on the cold floor, letting their words sink into the marrow of my bones. Maybe it's better this way. Better for them. Better if I just faded. Disappeared. Made it easy. But something inside me, something small and stubborn and furious, refused. I wasn't going to make it easy. Not for them. Not for anyone. I deserved better than this. And if they wouldn't give it to me, I would take it. Slowly, painfully, I pulled myself up, using the edge of the hallway table for support. My knees screamed. My hands trembled. But I stood. One breath. Then another. That evening, while they laughed in the living room, watching some mindless show, I sat at the kitchen table with Mary. Under the soft glow of the overhead light, we went over the papers one final time. The eviction notices. The official proof of ownership. The restraining orders, still blank, but ready if necessary. Mary had a friend, a retired sheriff, who had agreed to come with us the next morning. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted witnesses. I wanted no more secrets whispered behind closed doors. If this was going to end, it was going to end out in the open, under the full weight of the truth. I slept fitfully that night, if you could call it sleep at all. Dreams of younger days haunted me, Matthew as a boy, running barefoot through the backyard, his laughter pure and golden. I woke up to the crueler reality of who he had become. Morning came heavy and gray. Rain tapped against the windows like cautious fingers as I dressed in my best clothes, a navy blue dress my husband had always said made me look sharp, like a woman who means business. I pinned my hair back. Slipped my wedding ring onto my finger. Armor. Mary arrived at 9 sharp, the retired sheriff in tow. He was a big man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense air that filled the doorway behind him like a storm cloud. Together, we entered the living room where Clara and Matthew sat, bleary-eyed and sipping coffee. They didn't even look up at first. Matthew, I said, my voice steady. I need to talk to you. Both of you. Clara rolled her eyes. Matthew sighed. What is it now, Mom? He said, like I was an annoying fly buzzing around his head. I handed him the papers. For a moment, there was only the sound of rain and the crinkle of thick legal parchment. Then Clara's face drained of color. What the hell is this? She spat, rising to her feet. It's over, I said simply. My house. My rules. You have 30 days to vacate. Or the authorities will remove you. You can't do this, she shrieked, her voice pitching higher, shriller. I can, I said. And I have. Matthew stared at me, stunned, like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Mom, you don't mean this, he said, softer now, almost pleading. I didn't mean for it to come to this, I replied, feeling the tremor in my voice, the ache in my chest. But you made your choice. And now I'm making mine. Clara moved toward me, furious, but the sheriff stepped forward, blocking her path with a quiet, immovable authority. This isn't your home, I said, locking eyes with her. Not anymore. Maybe it never was. The next days were hell. They slammed doors. They cursed me under their breath. Clara wept loudly, dramatically, trying to shame me. But I stayed firm. Each box they packed felt like a stone lifted off my chest. Each empty drawer felt like breath returning to lungs that had been too long compressed. I expected Matthew to fight harder. To beg. to rage. But he didn't. Maybe deep down, he knew. Maybe deep down, he had known all along what they had become, and what he had allowed. When they finally left, dragging suitcases across the porch like broken promises, Clara turned to me one last time. "You'll die alone, you bitter old woman," she hissed. I smiled, a small, sad smile. "I'd rather die alone in my own home," I said, "than live surrounded by people who only pretended to love me." She didn't answer. She just got in the car and slammed the door so hard it rattled the windows. I watched them drive away, the taillights shrinking into the misty gray distance. And then, silence. Real silence. Not the cold, heavy silence of resentment and lies. But a clean silence. A silence I could fill with my own voice, my own breath, my own life. I closed the door. Turned the deadbolt. And for the first time in a long, long while, I was home. The first night after they left, the house felt too big. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind against the windows, echoed in the empty spaces they had left behind. For a while, I sat in the living room, staring at the bare walls where their pictures used to hang. The silence was thick, heavy, but not cruel. It was honest. I wasn't anyone's burden anymore. I was free. I just didn't know yet what to do with that freedom. The first thing I did was clean. I scrubbed every surface, polished every window, washed every sheet. It wasn't about dirt, it was about reclaiming. About pulling the house back into my hands, into my life, one small act at a time. The next few weeks passed slowly. Some mornings, I'd wake up half expecting to hear Clara's heels clicking down the hallway or Matthew's voice mumbling for coffee. But there was only sunlight filtering through the curtains and the soft ticking of the old grandfather clock. Loneliness crept in sometimes, a quiet, gnawing thing. But it wasn't the same as the loneliness I felt when they were here. This loneliness was clean. It didn't shame me or belittle me. It simply reminded me that I was still alive. And being alive meant I had choices. Small ones, at first. I started sitting on the porch again in the evenings, wrapped in an old quilt, watching the sky turn from blue to gold to the deepest indigo. I started baking, real baking, not the desperate offerings of a woman trying to earn affection, but rich loaves of bread and sweet pies made just because I wanted to. Mary came over often. We played cards, swapped stories, laughed until the tears rolled down our cheeks. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again, not the fragile, stumbling figure they had tried to reduce me to, but the woman who had once built a life out of ashes and grit and hope. One afternoon, I found the old photo albums tucked away in a closet. I sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through pages of faces frozen in time. There was Matthew as a boy, beaming with pride over a crooked science fair project. There was me and my husband, dancing barefoot in the backyard. For a long time, I cried. Not out of regret, though God knows there was enough of that, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for the love I had given. Gratitude for the strength I had found. Gratitude for the life that, despite everything, was still mine to shape. I thought about Matthew sometimes. I wondered if he missed me. If he regretted. I didn't call him. I didn't wait for an apology that would never come. Some wounds you don't reopen, even to test if they've healed. Instead, I planted a garden. I tore out the dying shrubs Clara had insisted on and replaced them with bright, stubborn marigolds. I painted the living room a soft, calming blue, the color I had always wanted. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a scrappy little mutt with one ear that wouldn't stand up straight and eyes too big for his head. I named him Lucky. We became a pair, two battered souls learning how to trust again. Slowly, the house began to hum with life once more. It wasn't loud or flashy. It wasn't the roaring laughter of a full house. It was the quiet contentment of a kettle whistling on the stove. The gentle thump of Lucky's tail against the floor. The soft creak of a rocking chair as I read a book under the warm afternoon sun. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for love. Not for forgiveness. Not for validation. This life, imperfect and stitched together with old scars and new hope, was enough. One evening, as I sat on the porch, Lucky curled at my feet, I watched the stars blink awake in the deepening sky. The house stood behind me, solid and stubborn, much like me. It had seen sorrow. It had seen betrayal. But it had also seen healing. It had seen a woman refuse to be erased. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in a long, long time, I smiled, not for anyone else's approval, not to mask pain, but because I wanted to. Because I could. Because I had finally come home to myself.